How nice is it outside? That's weird. All right, well, we can get started. And um, what I want to do today is really focus on the data sources that you should use for your project. Um, I think we know the project's due at the end of the semester. You'll have a little bit of time since we'll go home for Thanksgiving, and then we kind of have that week where you're on your own. But it would be nice if you gather some of that data beforehand. Any way that you maybe be able to work on this early and get this done. And I want to be very careful and show you some places of where to find the data, because if I just kind of turn you loose, it's probably going to just end up in a Google search and you're going to try to grab stuff. But here are some really good sources in general that you should be able to get most of the information for your project through these sources that you've got. And these are going to be a little more reliable. We know that the data that you get here, it's easier to get, you can trust it, all these different things. And so I know in the past, in the class, oftentimes people are just kind of randomly searching for stuff and it comes up. This, you can trust. And so in the past, we've seen some cases where things have been a little bit questionable. All right, so I want to kind of walk through that with you too to give you some ideas of where to get this stuff. We're in really good shape in terms of content that we've got. We're at the end of this next section, so we're probably pretty close to our next exam about tariff barriers and trade, essentially these trade platforms that we've got here. So this is like a good lead into that too. We'll be able to get some of that information. All right. Don't forget you've got your assignments on sugar quotas. So that's on Moodle too, and that's due on Tuesday. It's a little bit bigger. It might take you a little bit longer, so make sure to take a look at it over the weekend if you haven't started looking at it just yet. All right. Anything else? Not that I can think of. Yes. All right. Does that sound about right? So don't forget sugar quotas. Due on Tuesday. Take a look at all that good stuff. Probably on Tuesday when we meet next, we'll look at a couple trade agreements like U.S., Mexico, Canada specifically, and maybe the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So we'll probably take a look at those on Tuesday. And then for us, after that, we're ready to go into like the full remainder of our class will be just finance, international finance stuff. So exchange rates and currency options, all that kind of stuff. That's all right. All right, so first data source to think about for your project. All right, since the groups have already picked your countries, so you kind of know what you're looking at here. The first place I would go to with the use is the CIA World Factbook. I don't know if you've taken a look at this on your own yet. Some other classes use this, but this is a really good resource. It's got all sorts of great information, geographic, social, macroeconomic stuff. It's going to give you a really good background on your country. So this is a good place to start. It's going to tell you a lot about the political atmosphere, all these different things. All right, so we'll take a look at that in a second. We'll look at a specific country and I'll give you some ideas of what kind of information can you use and take from this. Some terms that maybe you want to use as your group creates your video, right? Purchasing power parity. This is just a way that we can kind of equalize purchasing power between countries. We know that prices are going to differ between countries too, so it's hard to if we're thinking about GDP and measures like this, it's hard to equate these values between countries. And so you'll see this pop up a few times with purchasing power parity. A lot of the variables that we're interested in will be measured in PPP. So kind of keep that in mind as we're seeing this. Okay. All right, so let's take a look and see, and maybe do an example here of how we can see what this looks like. All right, if you just search for the CIA World Factbook, it's going to come to here. You can pick the country. It's a really amazing resource, actually. So I'm hoping, right, the purpose of this project in particular is to learn more about your country. So take some time and explore some of the information that's provided here. Let's see here.
I thought we'd take Argentina. I don't think anybody picked Argentina as a country. All right. It's a video again. I kind of keep saying this. You guys have to be in charge of being creative and making a good video. That's not something I'll probably be able to help you with too much, but visuals are nice. So you might include the flag, you might put the map in. Where is your country located? That might help us at least initially kind of get an idea. What I like about the fact book again is you go through. Here's an introduction. This is just a good way to kind of get associated with your country. We don't need to look at that right now, but this is just, again, information that you can use to kind of work through some of these different things. Population data, these types of things, also important. How are you going to organize or structure it in your own presentation, in your own video, right? And again, look at all the great information that they have here. Population, different languages. These are an interesting component to the project as well as you start to look at these things. Government, what's the government structure? But then probably the one that you're most interested in is the economic variables that we have here. What does the economy look like? Gives you a nice little summary, how it's performing, what's going on. And then here we've got our GDP again. What's the units? We've got this purchasing power parity right here. So just kind of keep your eyes open on that so you be sure to be able to explain that, to understand the concept that we have. GDP, probably an important piece to go into the presentation that you've got. Probably important. Yeah, I would definitely include GDP as a measure, an important measure that you have right there. You've got an exchange rate too. Maybe the only kind of limitation that this has is it's a little bit older. I'll show you a couple other sources here in a bit where you'll see that these are newer, updated, more updated values that you've got here. But these are okay as just kind of get an impression of what this looks like in general. All right, you've got your GDP growth rate. That's kind of important to know too. GDP per capita, so by person. Now we can compare across other countries with that. GDP composition, that might be a little overkill. You probably don't need to do that. I imagine a lot of the countries that we have probably approximately the same that you've got there. One thing that we do want to really take a close look at too is like the composition of the economy, right? Is it agricultural? Is it service? Is it industrial? And so being able to see that, we can see that, we can get that information too from the CIA World Factbook as well. Labor force, how many workers are in a labor force? It's kind of an interesting breakdown too. How is the labor force distributed through that too? And going back, there's three major economic indicators. So GDP, inflation, unemployment. Those three things are going to be really important that you can kind of grab from here too as well. All right, so unemployment rate, trends in the unemployment rate, stuff like that is relatively important. All right, population below the poverty line. I don't know if you have to include all of this information, but when you make your projects, you want to tell a story, right? You're telling a narrative about your country. And so what kinds of pieces of information do you need to tell that story? All right, and so this might be a part of that. You know, do you have a wealthy country? Do you have a lot of people below the poverty rate in your country? Those kinds of questions are really what we're inflation rate, we said that's a big one. Current account balance, that's something we'll start talking about next week specifically. That's essentially a measure of the revenue you bring in from exports minus your imports with some foreign investment kind of thrown into. Current account balance, we'll see what that looks like here in a second. We'll grab that information from another place too, but
that's something that you might include. And then this is what I really like. This is like going to be really nice as you do your project is it's got your exports, but then what I like, it's got your export partners. Who are they exporting to? Like what countries? This is an important piece of the project is you want to be able to characterize that, right? And a lot of times it makes like a lot of sense. Like think about Argentina, Brazil, US, China, Chile. You'll want to explain why are those the most popular trade partners that they're working with. Same thing with imports or export commodities. What are they doing? A lot of agricultural stuff, some mining and gas, vehicles, other kind of things like that. And it's got the same breakdown for imports too. So it's got what's the value of the imports, what are the commodities that they're importing, who are their biggest import partners. So again, what's really great about this, right, is that it's in one location. It's going to give you all this information right here. We don't have to do separate Google searches to get this stuff. It's all in one reputable source. That's available. Okay. All right, so there you go. Again, this is a little bit weird. Ordinarily, in different times, we would let you do this on your own. We are too big as a group to go down to the computer lab. And so ordinarily that's what we would do in this class is spend a day in the lab and let you pick a country and go through some of that stuff and grab that information. It's a little different to do that. CIA World Factbook, go there first, get some good information. And then the next place I would go to is the World Trade Organization site. The World Trade Organization is kind of a unique group. Essentially what they're designed to do is they want to create trade liberalization. They want to make trade as free as possible. They are the governing body that rules on trade disputes between countries. Essentially, they come up with treaties to help formulate trade. Again, this is going to be really nice. This will be a great source to use. We're going to see it here in a second. You're going to be able to find a trade profile. That's going to be probably a really nice thing. The tariff profile. So again, this is something that you want to kind of look at here. What's the trade look like for what are the tariffs and other restrictions that the country has? Does your country belong to any essentially trade agreements? Are they local trade agreements or are there preferential trade agreements that they belong to? The WTO site will tell us if they belong to any of these groups. And then, and this will be kind of weird because we're going back and forth, but trade and value added. Here is an interesting idea with countries. One thing that we've noticed more recently, a trend in tariffs, is that we're tariffing goods that are final stages, end goods, things like that. So goods that are like final goods, right, that they're produced, that those goods have a higher tariff rate than intermediate goods as we trade. And that kind of makes sense, right, because we think if it's a good that's already finalized, bringing it to the country, it's a little bit easier to tariff that. In this case, the tariff and value added, because we are shipping intermediate goods throughout countries and then they're doing something to those, the trade and value added is a really interesting idea because it's saying, okay, what did you do to this good? What part did you add to this? And that's a really kind of interesting thing as we see globalization take off and a lot of the goods that we make are made in multiple places. So that's an interesting kind of idea. I wanted to bring this up too. You might have heard about this. You might have studied this in another class. We have GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. This is essentially a treaty that came out after World War II, and that a lot of countries, member countries, have signed on to. This treaty, it sets rules governing trade between countries. Essentially, the idea they want to increase market access, reduce agricultural subsidies. They want to protect. They have these anti-dumping strategies that they have too to prevent people from dumping. All these different kind of things to protect those member countries. Relatively a newer idea is the General Agreement on Trade and Services. So GATT. So this is slightly different. Now, initially, when GATT came out, after World War II, the economy was really industrial, right? It was all about manufacturing goods. But that changed, right? Since the 1970s, service industry has been much, much more important. And so that's what GATS was looking to solve that problem, is that now it's looking at not just trade in goods, but trade in our services too. That's a little bit different kind of thing to figure out. And so GATS is looking to create treaties that help promote freer trade in services as well.
All right, so keep your eyes open for those things. And we can go back and check out the World Trade Organization website. Just go to the WTO. This is really nice. It kind of tell you what's going on in the world in terms of trade. Should be able to get your country. I think probably all the countries that we're dealing with are probably WTO members. I can't remember what everyone's country is, but it's pretty safe bet. All right, Argentina and WTO. Over here on the left side, trade profile. I really like these actually. These are a great way to kind of get some information on your country. Let's see if we can just pop up this one. Some good visuals, good breakdowns. Share in the world's total exports. Here's breaking it down by these different sector categories, so you can kind of get a nice idea here. Perfect information to kind of take and run with, included in that project and that story that you're trying to tell everybody else. Similar breakdown in the tariff profile, so that'll be really interesting if you want to know how many restrictions does your country use. Is it pretty free, or are they pretty protected? All right, so that might be kind of an interesting question to ask. That's something that we want to see between our countries and see how that works. Notice how we made a comment earlier about the trade and value added. So that also might be a report that's worth viewing just to kind of get an idea, right, of what those different things are. On the right-hand side, this is going to tell you what trade agreements that your country belongs to. Some of these are pretty interesting. Like here's the Committee on Trade and Civil Aircraft. Trade treaties are interesting things. You'll get a chance to kind of take a look at some of these too and see what's interesting for your country, what's it kind of doing. There are preferential trade agreements, so you can take a look at those, and then there's regional trade agreements. They might be a part of a regional group that we might see. So if we look at regional trade agreements for Argentina, we can see some of the groups that they belong to. It's pretty interesting to see, right? Some of these groups, just kind of take a look, and it makes a lot of sense, especially like the South American groups that they belong to. So there you go. You can kind of have an idea there. Again, that helps tell that story. Oftentimes, too, if there are any trade disputes between countries, like if Argentina was disputing on some other thing, if they were worried, like the U.S. and the EU with the aircraft, Boeing and Airbus, there would be articles about that as well, and so they'll have some articles describing kind of what's going on. All right, so again, this is a pretty nice breakdown. If you're looking for stories, like you might want to tell a story about your country, sometimes they have those case studies, so we'll kind of talk about some of the disputes or kind of interesting things. So that's a great place to kind of find something that's happening recently too, topical, ideas that you have. Right, so definitely kind of use that too. Let's see. All right. And dispute cases, again, that's going to be kind of up to you. It depends on the kind of story you're taking, but there might be like an interesting story. I think, one of those recently, the US and EU with Airbus and Boeing, that's an interesting story. You never know what you might kind of find with your specific country that you have there. All right, questions on WTO stuff?
If you are econ finance, you've probably seen Fred before. You know that we really like the St. Louis Fred for hosting the Federal Reserve Economic Database, what it is here, and this has got some incredible stuff. So when we pop up Fred in a second, we'll see like how many time series data sets that they have, and this is a really good place to go to if you're looking for exchange rates, those three major economic indicators. It's going to be a little more updated than maybe the CIA World Factbook was. We can get data on exchange rates. We can also look at the imports exports from the country. And that current accounts, this balance of payments thing, that's going to tell us like roughly the difference between your export revenue and import revenue that you've got. These are probably all like pretty important. Those are all pretty basic summary values that you might be looking for here. 766,000. The great thing about Fred is it's not just the U.S. data sets. They have a lot of international data sets too. And so you can just search Fred and kind of find some of these. If I want, let's see, GDP, Argentina. I think they give this to me in US dollars. I can play around. This is definitely like, one of the reasons for this project that we have here is to give you some experience playing around with the data. A lot of times, as you work, you need to know, like, where do I get the data from? How do I manipulate it? What do I need to do to summarize it? All those different things. And this is another good place to do it. It's a government-run site, very reputable. You don't have to worry about the integrity of the data or anything like that. And here we can get GDP for almost any of your countries. I'm pretty sure it's going to have it right here. Easy to now. Again, just to say, like, it's easy when we're doing projects. It's easy to just kind of do a Google search and maybe check images, and there's the picture I want, and I'm just going to copy that image and put it right in. I am guilty of doing that when I'm on last minute trying to get presentations done, but I actually don't like doing that. I really like having like the chance to kind of look at it myself, make sure this is exactly what I'm looking at. That's been a problem in the past, right? Is that people just kind of assume they take this chart, but they don't really know. Here, you have to kind of know what this is, right? There's lots of options. You can download this as an image. You can download the data if you need to play around with it in Excel if you had to. This is actually probably okay. I'm pretty comfortable with Fred. You'll see a lot of economists actually, if they're posting to Twitter or to their blogs and stuff, they're using charts right from Fred. They just make them. You can export them really easily. It's pretty neat to be able to do that, right? So if you're going to use your chart, check your time, what makes it kind of look good, what's going to tell you that story again. Do what you want to do because this is your story. It's not like you have to take someone else's graph, right? This is yours. So play around with it. You can get your data, export it really nice and easily. And the tricky thing is like how you're going to put in the video. That should be easy, but then like normally if you're here explaining it, that's a little bit different than how you might do that. Yeah, that's your job. That'll be what you guys get to do. All right, so that's GDP. We can get inflation too. We don't need to do that right now. Another really important one though, because
Well, the CIA World Factbook is going to give us the imports and export data. It's not going to give it to us in a nice chart form. It's not going to give us something that we can actually like play around with. That's why we probably want to look at it here. Imports for Argentina. This looks pretty good to me. And it gives you a nice graph. We can kind of see. Now this is kind of interesting. If you're doing Argentina, we would need to explain like what's happening. Why is what's happening recently with imports? What's going on? It might be some kind of political issue that's happening in the country. And so trying to explain this. The other great thing too is that notice the CIA World Factbook, I think 2017 was the most recent data. This is pretty recent, right? So this is up to probably the second quarter of 2020. And we didn't get that data from the CIA World Factbook. So this is going to be more available to us. It's going to be more recent. What's the story happening here? Why are imports falling? Like, what's going on? And then I might want to do the same thing. I might need a chart then for exports. What do we think's happening to Argentinian exports? Argentine exports. Any guesses? Let's look back 10 years. Something's going on, right? So there's a story here, definitely. You see what's happening to the level of exports. Something happens here. I think actually there's a really good Planet Money podcast from a year and a half ago or so that kind of goes through this and walks through it. You might try that too. So think about your country as you're going through this. Like, you want to explain these? Maybe there's, what other information's out there, right? It's going to help explain kind of what's happening. Inflation, you can probably get your unemployment data here too if you want to make those charts. If you want to use those values that you got. Another one that we'll spend a little more time defining is the current accounts. Just decided this balance of payments. Let's see if I can get it here. Yeah, I think this, maybe that's not what I'm looking for. GDP by expenditure. To check that one again. Yeah, this was the one I want. Your current account is kind of the difference between your export revenue and your import costs. It's a good measure of your trade balance. And so this is another good kind of, as you look at your country, as you're ready to go through and see what's happening, you can look at a couple other examples. All right, so really, those three are going to give you a lot of information. And again, make your charts. Fred is so easy to use. And if you have questions about using Fred, just like once we can usually get it knocked out in like 5 minutes. But honestly, you should be able to get your charts okay. You can change them up if you want to. You really can change a lot of the formatting and the variable measurements, all that kind of stuff. So you can kind of really tailor make those charts that you have there. I want to take a moment. So another kind of big part of the presentation is going to be about the foreign exchange market, the currencies that you have. All right, and so I want to just mention Forex because you might have heard of this. We'll take a quick peek at this. Forex is really like the most popular foreign exchange trading platform. So you can set up an account here and trade currencies. If you're interested in it, kind of like a brokerage account, buying and selling currencies of other countries, try to make a little bit of money. We'll also use the Forex, I'll just show it to you so you can kind of get an idea. The Wall Street Journal has a really good breakdown of currencies. I'll show you where you can kind of get that information if that'll help you with what you've got. So as we get into our next section, that's going to really look at currencies and appreciation and depreciation of the currencies that we're looking at. I wanted to share this with you. So Forex is probably the most popular trading platform for currency exchange. I remember when I was in college, like this was a pretty rare occurrence. I got an email from Forex, and they were like, "We want you to start trading currency, right?" And this is kind of a weird thing before you got as much spam email from things like at the time. And so one of the things they say, now you get a crazy margin that you trade on this. And so essentially they let you trade on a huge margin for these currency exchanges. And the scary thing is that currencies move a lot. There's a lot of volatility here. But you can set up an account. They let you trade on margin. They let you trade, I think, 100 to 1 in some cases that you've got. So I haven't checked the commission fees and things like that, but if you're interested in kind of getting into this, this is one area that we'll talk about next, how we can buy and sell currencies, trade them. Pretty simple to open an account. I don't know if you can do the same thing on like a Robinhood thing, I don't know. I think you can buy ETFs in currencies, but I don't know if they have a separate like currency exchange that you have here. So that's just kind of an idea to kind of look at. All right, I'll show you where you can find the currency. So this might help a little bit. It's under markets. So if you just check markets, look for the currencies. Of all the places online, this has got a pretty good rundown of what the currency markets kind of look like. Again, this is what we'll spend a lot of our time with next week and through the rest of the semesters, like figuring out what's happening here. It's a pretty interesting market that you see. So we can see the currencies usually relative to the dollar. We'll talk about these cross rates. And so this is kind of an interesting thing we'll get to, but a lot of currency, there's sometimes like currency arbitration or currency arbitrage, where you can take advantage of small fluctuations in currency and maybe make a little bit of extra money riskless. And a lot of companies actually, back before like internet speeds got really, really fast, you could kind of take advantage, like if you have information before other people, and make trades and kind of front run the market and make a little bit of extra money. All right, so this is a good place to come. You're going to start looking at essentially what's happened to the exchange rate of your country over time. Here you can kind of get a picture of what it looks like. And then our last one here, the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Not as many countries are members of the OECD. Only like 35 countries, I think, are members. So this one, it's possible that your country might not be a part of OECD, but if it does, they have some really nice data. Some more specific stuff that the other places might not have, so it might be a little more detailed than what we'd expect. Education, they might have financial data, so interest rates, other things, savings rates, things like that. And so that might be nice if you're comparing across different countries. They got estimates for that purchasing power parity available as well, to kind of help with some of those. OECD. So again, this is really nice. We've actually used this already. This was the first assignment in our class. It had to make you go through and grab the imports as a percentage of GDP and exports as a percentage of GDP, and pick several countries inside there and kind of get the data from that. Same kind of idea. You can pick by topic. You can look by country. But some of these topics are really kind of interesting, especially if your country is a member of the OECD. If we're looking at agriculture, like how big is agriculture in your country? Development, education, I think is a really interesting one. So something that people have used in the past is what percentage of women, or what education level do they attain, or what's the difference between men and women? So that's kind of an interesting question that you can see there. Finance, exchange rates. This is interesting too. One that we don't see too often is like insurance. So insurance is actually a really nice. When you have insurance markets, it's really nice for people. You can. It means you pass your risk on to somebody else. And so insurance is a big sign of like how healthy your economy is, how healthy your country is. So you can kind of take a look at that. Interest rates, we might be interested in that. What's the monetary policy of the country that you've got? All those different things. What's the tax situation look like? Healthcare, labor market, all those different areas here that are really nice that you can get a little bit extra information and see here how this works. So definitely use these sources. You don't have to just kind of go out on your own and just randomly search and find the information that you have here. Here you got an opportunity to kind of take a look specifically and directly and see what this is. All right. Now, in addition to that kind of stuff, we know you'll have to pick a few things that I didn't show you. So one of those things is you got to pick a market, a stock market specifically relating that's inside your country, like the Nikkei in Japan or something like that, right? So you'll have to take a look at that. I would suggest going directly to the website of that particular stock exchange. Okay, that's where you're going to get the best information for that. So don't forget there's got to be something there. What are the big industries in that market? Like what are the big companies that exist? Kind of an interesting piece. And the other one that you want to kind of add to is what's the kind of labor market culture? So what are some typical like job, what do people do? Do they dress up to go to work? Is it a little less formal? Those types of things. Are there any kind of interesting things, interesting cultural things that people do in the workplace? And so that's kind of interesting. I remember like Italy, there's like a special handshake maybe or something, I'm not sure. So keep your eyes open for that kind of stuff too. Like what's a kind of a unique job, cultural kind of thing that you've got there? All right, other questions about that?
You have like a friend or something that studies or something like that in the country, you use it as like a source to ask like your questions like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Do you have a friend in the country? Please ask them there. It's a great resource. Yeah, that's a really good resource. Yeah. That's perfect. So if you know someone in the country, feel free to ask them. They can give you some help. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. All right. Sugar quotas. You've had enough time to work on it, so you get a little extra time. Don't put it off. It does take a little bit of time. There's some Excel work in there that you got to do. So make sure you're taking a look at that. That's due Tuesday, then we'll come back and kind of finish up this stuff and be ready to move on to the next